we've still got people entering, but we want to kick off because we've got a jam-packed night. We've had an incredible response from the community and some amazing questions sent through. So first of all, I just want to congratulate everyone for coming tonight. I mean, this is a great show of democracy at work right here, so thank you for being here. My name is Laura Rufus, and I'm the convener of the Corangamite Climate Alliance, who are hosting this forum tonight. I also represent the Geelong and Waurn Australian Parents for Climate Action Group. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge that we are all present on the traditional lands of the Waurn people of the Kulin Nation, and respect that their sovereignty is never ceded. We honour and pay respect to the culture, heritage and spirituality and contribution of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and their elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations people that are with us tonight. We recognise that there is no climate justice without social justice to our First Nations people, and that our First Nations people have tremendous knowledge and wisdom that all Australians, including the government, can learn from to protect and heal country. So, I'm not sure how many of you have organised the Candidates Forum tonight. Can I have a show of hands, anyone? Might be a few in the audience. So look, there's a lot of work to be done behind it, so I really want to extend my thanks and acknowledgement to Noreen, who is an absolute taskmaster when it comes to organising events. Thanks, Noreen. Sal, Rowan, Susan, Mick and Karen for everything that they've thrown into this. The Corangamite Climate Alliance is made up of all these awesome groups. You're going to change the slide for me. Slight technical hitch. And it's growing. So these organisations are fiercely advocating for a safe climate future for our communities and indeed the world. I want to thank them and all of their volunteer members for their tireless work. You really inspire me and I thank you so much. Now more than ever, we need community and to strengthen our connection. Alone we are strong, but together we are stronger. So I'll let our moderator Tim Lamacraft explain the order of the night, but I will let you all know that tonight's being filmed by Jake up here, so don't be camera shy or afraid to get in front of the camera later on. In the advertising for this event, we said we welcomed our community to get informed and inspired about the future we can create with strong federal leadership. We have already seen some state and local governments, even businesses ramping up their ambition and courage to seize and commit to strong plans on climate action. But to achieve strong emission reduction targets and to create the hundreds of thousands of jobs in new industries, new careers for our children, we need federal policy and funding to unlock these opportunities for all Australians. The latest IPCC report noted, and I quote, "The cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Any further delay in concerted, anticipatory, and you want to mix that up, global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a safe, livable and sustainable future for all," in brackets, very high confidence. That's deafening. Action on climate is common sense. It will make our communities and lives a lot better. The Ozpol survey released last week showed people in Corangamite want climate action, and I think you're demonstrating that tonight. The number one priority solution for greater action on climate change for our community this decade is to replace gas and coal power with renewable energy and battery storage. 67% of people believe benefits that they receive from greater action on climate change outweigh any costs involved. 68% of people believe greater action on climate change will strengthen the Australian economy. and 65% of our community believe greater action on climate change by the federal government would be good for their health. Sounds like action on climate change is a win-win for me. This is such a critical election, and we are so grateful that we have with us here tonight Labor's Libby Coker, Liberal candidate Stephanie Asher, and Greens Alex Marshall. And we will hear from our new arrival Meg Parker from the Animal Justice Party after the formal Q&A. So without any further delay, let's get started. I'd like to welcome to the stage Tim Lamacraft, who will be the moderator for the forum tonight. Tim is a senior journalist with the Times News Group, living on the Surf Coast. He's previously worked as a reporter and producer for The Age, ABC and The Project, reporting from regional and metropolitan New South Wales and Victoria. Plus, I will add to his CV that he's a really great mentor for providing top advice for candidate forums. So thank you so much for all the private time you've dedicated to make tonight happen, Tim. We are very lucky to have you here, and I know the candidates are in great hands. Thanks, Tim.
Hello everyone, just checking my mic's working. Yes, hello, I'm Tim Lamacraft, and thank you all so much for coming here. It is lovely to be kicking off one of the first campaign events for the election that I'm sure is going to be very imminent. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for our candidates for turning up. So I'd like to just briefly give you a bit of a running order on how things are going to go for tonight. Basically, there'll be a 2-minute time limit response for most of our candidates. I would ask that the audience behave nicely, don't interject, respect all our candidates for being here and for coming to front the audience and answer your questions. If you have a burning question, there may be time at the end. Put your hand up and we might see if we can get to you. Otherwise, we might save our questions till the end. So let's welcome everyone to the stage. Libby Coker for Labor, your federal candidate and member for Corangamite. Please welcome. And Stephanie Asher, please welcome to the stage. And Alex Marshall in the room. It struck me, some of you may have heard it, there was just this wonderful little anecdote in a podcast that's going at the moment from the ABC at the moment. It's called Australia If You're Listening. It's Matt Bevan, who's been preparing a little podcast about how he thinks this election is going to shape up the climate. And he starts in the first episode with a little article that was published in the Maitland Mercury, which is a newspaper that's still going, been going for a long time. It's up in the Hunter Valley, one of the greatest coal producing regions in the world. And it was titled Coal Consumption Affecting Climate. And it says the coal burned in furnaces around the world is causing an effect that may be considerable in a few centuries. And that was dated August 14, 1912. So let's set the scene with that, thinking about how long we've been talking about these issues and where we are today. So, Libby, given you're our incumbent member for the seat, we'll give you the first question. Libby, do you believe Australia and the world is facing a climate emergency? And is that language we should be using?
Now, the microphone is working? Hi everybody, lovely to be with you. Look, we are definitely facing a climate emergency. It is an absolute no-brainer. We know we're in crisis. We have floods, we see fires, we see the bleaching of the barrier reef. We are in crisis. And with respect, unlike my Liberal opponent, I have voted for a climate emergency. As a councillor and as a federal member, we are in a climate emergency. It's not only Labor that thinks that, the IPCC, their report shows we have a climate emergency. If we don't do anything more, we're going to have more catastrophes. When it comes to Veterans and Defence Force in the Australian yesterday, open page in the Australian. And then we have a 7:30 report last night, which you may have seen, saying that Angus Taylor's carbon credit scheme has been wrought and that we must do better. This is very concerning for me, and Labor does have a plan, and I can outline it. I don't have a great deal of time.
We'll definitely have room for that.
Yes, from renewing the grid right through to batteries, right through to getting people on board with solar. We have a plan, an investment which is going to bring prices down for energy bills. It's also going to mean jobs. 600,000 or more alone through renewing our grid so we can pump more renewables into the system.
Thank you. And Steph, we obviously heard there, a bit of an opening pitch as well, so we'll just remind everyone to try and keep their pitches short. And also, everyone, phones off, please. Just should have done a bit of housekeeping at the start. Please make sure your phones are on silent. Steph Asher, are we facing a climate emergency, and is that language we should be using?
Thank you, Tim.
I will speak up.
Is the mic working?
I'm on.
Is the mic working?
No.
No?
We'll give you
I'll turn it off here.
I'll take that.
I did turn it on. Yes, I did try and turn the microphone on. Firstly, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the room tonight. My personal view is absolutely yes. I do believe we are facing a climate emergency, so I will correct that misrepresentation that has just been made. And I'll say too that I have known Mick 8 years, since 2012, 2013 I think, and I've been a guest on the Sustainable Hour many times, and so I know the history of the term climate emergency, and I fully acknowledge Mick as the original source, and the progress that has been made from Mick's work I think is quite incredible, and I also understand his intent, and I believe it has worked extraordinarily well to raise awareness and change the conversation about climate-related action. I think we all recognise that. Unfortunately, the pandemic and the notion of emergency powers and the term emergency has probably, in terms of being related to our health response, has probably had a little bit of an effect in diluting the power of that word emergency in the past couple of years. But I do believe that there has been a clear message set, and I think there's a very, very clear understanding that we need to be doing everything that we possibly can to reduce emissions, change our behaviour, particularly around consumption and waste, and of course reducing emissions. And as Mayor of Greater Geelong, I champion the community-wide target, net zero target of 2035, and a council operations target of net zero by 2025. So I very firmly believe in ambitious targets, and we have very strong support in the community and from the councillors and from the council officers on that. So we all absolutely acknowledge the climate emergency as part of our sustainability framework and action plan at council as well. So very firmly yes, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex, how are we going with your mic? We might end up getting a bit of mic passing around.
Yes, thank you.
That's fine. So Alex Marshall, we've heard the response there. I think it's pretty clear where the Greens stand on this, but are we facing a climate emergency, and is that the language we should be using? It was interesting to hear Steph say just then that maybe the term emergency has been diluted, just like the word unprecedented, but is it the climate emergency? Is that the right language?
Undoubtedly, yes. We are in a climate emergency, and we are witnessing it through the exacerbation of natural disasters, like the Australian bushfires, the recent floods, and we are in a climate emergency. It threatens the safety of our people, it threatens our health, our water, our ability to grow food, the air that we breathe. The stakes have never been higher. I'm an environmental and social activist, and I worked on the campaigns to get Surf Coast Council and Geelong City Council to declare climate emergency, and I was in the rooms hearing all of the oppositions and the support for climate emergency declaration. And ultimately, what it means is an emergency, using that language, is important because emergencies demand action. And right now, we are lacking that action. The urgent action we need is being delayed because Liberal and Labor are taking millions of dollars in donations from fossil fuel companies and the billionaires that own them. In return, these companies get special treatment, and many of them pay no tax, sending their profits offshore tax-free. I'm very optimistic though, because we have all of the resources and abilities to address the climate emergency, as I'm sure everyone here knows. We know what to do, we know what action to take, The only thing we're lacking is the political will to do so.
Thank you. And look, although you all your open gambits, I'm sure we've all got talking points as well. I would ask to try as much as possible to stick to the questions and to, where possible, not use our talking points. I am obviously sitting here with a bunch of talking points as well, but many of mine are questions, and I'm the moderator, so I get to call the shots. Look, it was interesting, we were talking about language there. I think it's an interesting point Steph makes there, talking about is this language being diluted? We have heard so much over the last couple of years, so much emotive language. What I would be interested in saying is, because language is so important, and you say that you've been very clear, Steph, that the government is very clear about how it does consider this a climate emergency, or it's taking action on that. But I would sort of suggest that when we had Glasgow recently, there was certainly a lot of reticence coming from the coalition there. Labor was also quite struggling to really enunciate where it was at in its targets that it was going to do. So let's move on to the talk of emission targets. Steph, you've mentioned choices, not mandates, in response to suggestions that regulation should be imposed on Australia's biggest emitters. What do you mean by this?
Is this one working? Yes.
Yes.
Can we get grab a glass of water for Alex, by the way? Because I'm just the only one. Look, from what people are telling me on the street, I'd say everybody's actually over mandates at the moment. But I believe in people and businesses having choices. The Morrison government has set the goal of net zero 2050, which is the same as Labor's target, by the way. And we believe that businesses and individuals should have choice about how they achieve that. Now, I do support that approach. I also see the emissions reduction that we need to occur happening through technology. I've been seeing it in the conversations I've been having. There's so much positive conversation, positive energy, positive action, initiatives and innovation going on. We're talking to Geelong Manufacturing Council, to Deakin University, to Geelong Port, to Sea Road Ferries. Everywhere I go, there is absolutely action on the ground, which is fantastic. People are talking about hydrogen research, battery research, getting that tech happening. So I think that is a really exciting comment and a really exciting I suppose, point in time for this community. This is where we really see ourselves as an active and innovative region, and I think we can back that up, particularly with Deakin University. I can talk about that a little bit more in answer to some of the other questions.
Sure.
But I do believe the answer is about incentivising businesses to do better. Certainly not in new taxes. At the moment we've got the rising cost of living, so nobody wants more taxes. But the road to net zero does involve a lot of different industries and a lot of complexity, and it involves a dramatic change for a lot of companies as well. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. There does need to be a transition. There do need to be options during that transition. And I believe we're all in this together. I'm clearly hearing the fights are over. Like, this is a conversation everybody's in agreement, which is fantastic. But I think to get the best outcome, we need to incentivise, not demonise. So that would be my viewpoint.
Sure. I mean, it's clear the fights aren't over. There's still a lot of fights going on at a federal level. I sort of think it's interesting. I mean, essentially the question there was regulations. Do you believe there should be regulations on big emitters?
Well, it's mandates, you said. So mandated regulations, yes, regulations. Choices around how they achieve that. There's obviously nuances in there, Tim.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Libby Coker, what do you think?
I think that we need regulation. Labor has a very strong policy. If we want to see emissions reduced to Labor's 2030 target of 43%, we need to reduce emissions. So we will be working with the 215 biggest emitters to make sure that we reduce emissions by those companies. We will do it via regulation, and it's very important. I think you've got to put your money where your mouth is. Labor has a reconstruction fund, $15 billion into ensuring that we can create new products, and I want them to be made, some of those locally. As Stephanie said, Deakin University, many other organisations. I went out to a company today that's actually recycling now, and we need to do more of that. So it's about creating an environment where industry wants to invest in renewables. We've had such an uneven playing field. We've found the government, the federal government, the Morrison government have made it very difficult for industry to have the comfort to know if they invest, they can do well. So we have a plan, whether it's, as I said, renewing the grid. If you want to put power back into the grid at the moment, it is too difficult. We will have a massive program to upgrade the grid so we can put renewables back into it, and it will be 600,000 jobs, as I said. It is about not only jobs, but it is about the environment, and it's about making sure that our children have a future and our planet has a future.
Alex Marshall, the topic of emissions targets has decapitated leaders on both sides of politics here. It is toxic what it does to each side of politics. Where do you, as a Green, see the issue of emissions targets and regulations? What is the target for the Greens? What is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Greens have a 75% emission target by 2030 and net zero or net negative Australian emissions by 2035. In terms of emission targets, the recent IPCC. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's way better. Hey. Okay. The latest IPCC report in 2021, which again I'm sure everyone here is so familiar with, confirmed that we're not doing enough. Unless we rapidly decarbonise our economies, we will reach 1.5 degrees warming sooner than we think. So regulations and imposing regulations on Australians' biggest emitters are necessary according to science. So.
Look, I'm wary. I mean, obviously we've got a captive audience here that's passionate about the climate. It's very hard not to get lost in some of the rhetoric and talk about offsets and emissions targets and rubbery sort of language that goes with it all. So I'll try and keep it brief and I'll try and rein it in, but where do you all stand on the use of offsets being used by Australia's biggest emitters? Steph, I'll start with you.
Sure. Sorry, thanks. Look, I support offsets. I know that as an isolated solution, obviously it's not going to be acceptable, but there's going to be a mix of strategies. We're going to need to do a whole bunch of different things to actually reach net zero. I think we all know that. So I think offsets is one of the tools in the box. It's certainly not the only one, but it does play a fairly big part in the transition. And as the landscape shifts at the moment, we have got ongoing issues with cement. We're still using petrol and diesel vehicles. We've got these big emitters. We're not going to switch it off. You can't just turn the tap off overnight. So to allow organisations and industries to make a transition as quickly as we possibly can, we need to be able to provide options that are achievable. Don't put people out of business. Don't create disasters in communities and cost everybody livelihoods. So I think it is a legitimate tool in the toolbox, but no, definitely not the only thing to be considering.
Libby, I'll get to you in 2 secs. The notion of putting people out of business is an interesting line because, and it's a very emotive way of describing it, but it's like describing the tobacco industry. There will be this point where coal industries realise they are simply selling a product that is being switched off. It's already happening around the world. Global markets are moving. We are already seeing a shrinking number of destination points for what has been one of our biggest exports for a long time. So I think it's interesting that sort of language, how we talk about not putting people out of business, because people are going to go out of business whether they like it or not. Markets are moving. And that's the same for Labor, that's the same for Liberal. You are both intrinsically tied to them in different ways, but there is a reckoning going on that I think we all need to be very honest with. We need to have that conversation with these communities, with the Hunter Valley coal communities, with the Latrobe Valley coal communities, to be honest with them that there is a change coming and that their job might not be forever and it needs to be finite. So I will get to you, Libby, on the question of offsets. We heard today in your preamble, we've heard from the whistleblower today, who is basically saying that up to 80% of the carbon offset scheme could be a sham. This is a person who is heading up the government department. So where does Labor stand on the use of offsets? How much do you factor it in to your plans for reducing emissions?
I think offsets have an important role to play, and Labor is supportive of offsets, but it's supportive of offsets that we need to hold people who apply for these offsets to account. We need to have a system that's robust and has integrity. And we've just seen in that program last night on the 7:30 report that the current system doesn't have integrity. And it can work. It can be a very good system where you have got massive growth of trees which reduce emissions. We have ways of actually restoring the environment through offsets, but it has to be, we have to hold the system to account and make sure that our taxpayers' dollars aren't used in vain, and that the environment and taxpayers are in the end the ones that suffer.
Alex, how do we hold people to account when there is literally billions of dollars at stake in these offsets, these carbon offset schemes that have been discussed for years, and we don't actually have necessary, regulatory bodies at the top? We've got, this matter we're talking about, the carbon offset scheme, is talk of it being referred to the Auditor General. The Auditor General's been quite scathing of a lot of government programs of late, and they've been swept aside. Some of those criticisms, sure, they've taken some hits. But, Alex Marshall, what's the Greens' stance on the use of offsets, whether that's not chopping down trees, replanting, revegetating landscapes? If a coal mine is going to clear one area, then they're going to set up a like-minded area over here. Where do the Greens sit in this space?
Absolutely. Offsets are positive, but we can't offset the climate emergency. We need serious action, including no new fossil fuel projects, and transitioning out of the ones we currently have, including job retraining for workers and communities within mining communities and anyone who's within the fossil fuel industry. The Greens, we're not relying on offsets. We are not waiting till 2050, and we are not influenced by fossil fuel donations. The Greens, we have an achievable science-backed plan to address the climate emergency that includes offsets but does not rely on them. A plan that will take the serious and necessary climate action right now.
So, you've all agreed that you would advocate for the G21 proposal of, it's the Renewable Energy Industrial Precinct in the region. I might get you to, I love all these acronyms, Renewable Energy Precinct, but it's self-explanatory. What does that look like? And Steph, I'm interested, you are, you've stepped aside for the moment, you're the Geelong Mayor, and you're about to be past your mic as well. You're the Geelong Mayor, so you've got a pretty good understanding of what's happening in this space. What does it look like, and how will your party advocate to make it happen? What does a renewable energy precinct in Geelong look like, and what's it constituted from?
It's a really good question, and my first answer will be I think Deakin University will play a huge role, so I think we're quite well placed where we are tonight. And just for reference,
what would Deakin?
I'll explain in a moment. I actually did Deakin's first sustainability strategy back in 2014 for the 5 years, and that actually kicked off a $15 million investment in the activities that are going out. So I did their sustainability strategy and 2 years of sustainability reporting for Deakin. At the moment, they've got the Trailblazer project that they're seeking federal funding for. I'm not sure if anybody read the story in the Geelong Eddy a few days ago, but in meeting with the Vice-Chancellor the other day, it was so exciting, and I'm going to reach to an acronym here, sorry, but Deakin wants an acronym. It's the Recycling and Renewable Energy Commercialisation Hub, which is REACH, and it's got a whole host of different projects going on. They've got Manufutures, which you might already know is an accelerator hub, so scaling up sort of proven tech and innovation for commercialisation. They've got the Battery Hub, which is a battery tech test and research facility. They've got their 7.5 megawatt solar grid already out there at the back, which I hadn't seen before, but it's incredibly impressive. They've got high cell testing and manufacturing for hydrogen technology, and a whole bunch of other innovative things going on. So they're seeking federal funding to basically create a precinct here with Deakin. As G21 Chair, I was really heavily involved in seeking presentations to those 5 councils. We have Ross and Williams tonight, and also to the independent directors as well, from organisations who are all about sustainability, because it's a passion of mine. And we had quite a few really interesting presentations from various recycling organisations, people who have acknowledged and understand that the solar panels, which have a commercial life of only 7 years, are currently going to landfill. So there's issues like that we don't even know are happening, but there's businesses that have identified these sorts of things and are providing solutions. So there's some really good activities going on. Certainly G21, the acting chair now in my absence is actually the Chief Operating Officer of Deakin. So that's in very good hands. It's a fantastic board. They're a very active organisation. There goes my bell. And Geelong Port as well, another big hub of really amazing things.
Libby, we heard a pretty good sort of breadth there of some things that are happening in this space.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got educational institutions that say we're ready. What does the Renewable Energy Precinct look like for you? And what sort of technologies is it? What are we looking at there? We've heard the term hydrogen. I mean, are we talking about green hydrogen, blue hydrogen? What's an example?
Look, I think Labor obviously is very supportive of such a precinct, and we are very well positioned here in the Geelong region. As Stephanie said, Deakin has played an amazing role so far, and they've done a lot of it off their own bat. There has been federal and state funding to support them in creating things like, carbon futures, carbon nexus. They're doing great work, but we do need to broaden it out. And whether we do it at Deakin or elsewhere, certainly under Labor's $15 billion reconstruction scheme, that we would look at supporting such I would certainly be advocating to, but I would hope that we would support such an initiative. And things like green hydrogen are very important. How we go about helping with R&D investment, which is so important to creating new renewable energy products, and even whether it's waste and recycling. There's so much that we can do, and it's really interesting because when I was with G21 as a member of that, and as a mayor, taking on the helm as Stephanie has also, it is a great vehicle with the 5 councils working with our health and education sectors. We are so well placed. So we have got the ability and the capacity. We can do so much more, and I will be a great advocate for this region to make sure we support G21's proposal and that we get something up, because once again, it is about jobs, it's about lowering emissions.
It's a good point you both make there. I think in many ways we're all very lucky. We have 2 ladies here who have served peak councils, have both been heavily involved in G21. It's nice to hear a bit of bipartisanship going on here for the region. So it's nice to hear a bit of celebration of the region here in a bipartisan way. Alex Marshall, what does a renewable energy precinct in Geelong look like for you? And it doesn't just have to be Geelong, it's where Geelong. There's plenty of other energy projects that are feeding in to Geelong.
Yes, so obviously the Greens support this proposal, and it's great to hear from both Libby and Stephanie about it in even more detail. It's really great and positive initiative. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Okay. Can you tell it's my first time running?
You're doing well.
Thank you. So in Corangamite, G21 and Australia, we have brilliant scientists, skilled engineers, and a world-class workforce. If we back them and invest into manufacturing, we can address the climate crisis, strengthen our communities, and ensure well-paid, secure jobs. So
let's keep things tracking along. We're doing very well here. We're keeping to the time script. So let's see if we can get going. Look, I might start with you, Alex. You can set the tone on this one. Do you support other new fossil fuel projects in the country? In Australia? Let's start broadly. Where do the Greens sit on this? Do you want to see any new coal-fired power stations, gas-fired power stations at all?
No.
Let's stick complete. Steph, where do you sit on this? And I'll just ask someone to pass the microphone. Steph, where does the Liberal Party sit on the construction of a new coal-fired plant, of a new gas-fired power station?
Well, you're talking my personal view here, not the Liberal Party, so this is one of the
Sure.
wonderful things about the Liberal Party.
You're standing as a Liberal.
Yes, absolutely, but you asked my opinion, and
As a representative of the Liberal Party.
absolutely. One of the wonderful things about the Liberal Party is you are actually able to have an individual viewpoint. So you are. It's interesting that there's a laugh.
I would ask that there's not too much internet. I would ask there's not too much internet.
Yes. No. The question is, the question we have to do is support new fossil fuel projects
Correct.
in the country.
That's correct.
In terms of specifics, I'm not going to answer about specifics. I don't support new fossil fuel projects in this region. And we had Susan Lee out here a few weeks ago, and she said, and Belinda was there, the Surface for Climate representative, and asked the same question. And Susan said there are no new projects on the table at the moment. Now, there's
Can we just get clarification on, are we talking for energy generation? Is that what we're talking about?
We were talking about the gas, the Otway Basin and the Victorian landscape.
Right.
Now, there's no new projects on the table at the moment was Susan's comment about that.
Right.
What I'm here for is to understand what the community is saying and represent what the community is saying. Now, I certainly hear very passionate voices, and I sat with Belinda and we had a fantastic conversation. I've sat with a whole host of different groups, and I agree with you. You're not talking to somebody who disagrees with you, okay? So my role as a community representative is to take that voice to Parliament if I'm elected. Now that's one of the key reasons for me in running, and I know that you will say, you have just said that you don't believe that you're allowed to have individual viewpoints. I can categorically say you are. That was demonstrated just recently when people did have a different point of view around something that went to Parliament. So that is my stand, is to actually represent what the community's views are, and certainly in this room, I absolutely understand the passion around that. So that's my answer.
We'll get to the issue of whether there are or not new fossil fuel projects in the region, because there are. There most certainly are. In fact, and we will get to this, in the Otway Basin, there was a release of a very large new area for oil and gas projects. That was from the coalition government. In fact, the Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, has been up this week talking about giving money in the upcoming budget to gas projects in the region. They may not be technically in the Corangamite election, but the pipelines come through here, and the ocean certainly ebbs and flows in
state
this
government
region.
also has a role to play there.
Yeah, well, okay, we can get into that in a second, and we will, because it's interesting, because the federal government's very keen to point out that the state government has a dog in this fight, and indeed they do, and you're quite correct. The Labor government certainly has a dog in the oil and gas fight. But I think we're probably going to get to that a bit later on, actually. So I think I might just park it for 2 seconds, and we'll circle back to it. Libby, where does Labor stand on new coal-fired power stations, gas-fired power stations in Australia? Where are you at with that?
So Labor has said we will not support any new coal-fired power stations. We will not put any Commonwealth dollars into new gas or coal-fired stations. This is something I feel passionate about. And look, with respect to Stephanie, the fact is that while you can have individual views, you are representing a party that is putting dollars into new coal plants in Queensland and other places, and have a policy to, as we've just heard, Angus Taylor is actually saying we're going to put money into gas projects. Currently just announced that the other day. So look, I think there is a distinct difference there, and the people do need to understand that Labor is different, that we have said we will not fund coal-fired new coal plants. It is really important that we move forward. The only way we're going to get to 43% reduction in net emissions by 2030 is if we have a very strong shift away from toxic coal and to a lesser extent gas and to renewables. There is a transition process, and I acknowledge that, but we need to do it as soon as we can. If we're going to save the planet, we're going to have a future for our children.
One of the issues that I see for both of you, really, is sure there's a transition going on, but really right now there is an area that has basically just gone open to bidding, or bidding's closed on it, ended in March. So we won't probably find out who that is for 6 to 12 months. But there is an area in the Otway Basin that is basically going to expand the oil and gas footprint there by 3 times. And it's problematic for you, Libby, because the state Labor government is wedded into it in many ways. And it's very problematic for you as well, because it is your party, Steph, that is very much out there hitting the gas. And Angus Taylor this week has very much been out there saying, I'm going to give money to Lockhart for underground gas storage. The gas is going to come from the Otway Basin. And we know, this is why it's problematic for either of you, whoever really gets in, is because whilst we may be undergoing this transition, to renewables or whatever that future might look like, these projects are in the pipeline and they're going to be there for decades, because this is the way these projects work. They don't just happen overnight, they take years and years and years and years to develop, and it's happening, and these projects being locked in and people have put in their winning bids. It's going to happen under Labor, it'll happen under Liberal coalition government. Alex Marshall, is this kind of the problem that we're talking about there? We saw this sort of shifting there. So, we understand Steph personally might not agree with some of these projects, but there's this notion that there's no new projects going on, but there's massive new projects going on in the region. It is strange to say it. I mean, Tim Wilson this week, who is the Assistant Energy Minister to Angus Taylor, he's a Victorian MP, he was asked this very question on ABC radio. Tim Wilson, what do you make of these new oil and gas projects? And again, he said this is a matter for the state government. Well, it's not a matter for the state government. It's absolute obfuscation to say it is. And I find it deeply distressing, as we're not even in an election, that this blame shifting is going on straight away, when 2 days later, the senior minister will get up and say, we're hitting the gas in that region. Alex Marshall, is this the problem for both sides of politics? That they are wedded to these projects and these industries, and they find it uncomfortable territory to talk about?
Yes.
Sorry, a microphone to Alex.
Yes, it's absolutely the problem. We need to stop fossil fuels yesterday. Thank you. We need to stop fossil fuels yesterday, and we have a government and we have 2 major parties who are so committed to these fossil fuel corporations and so ready to continue working with them as long as the donations keep coming through. And we have to, it's so simple that if we keep burning coal and gas, the climate crisis will keep exacerbating. And if you don't have a plan to phase out coal and gas and fossil fuels, you don't have a plan for climate.
Look, I feel like we've kind of touched on this question, but I'd be interested to hear another perspective from all of you. We touched on with the Renewable Energy Precinct question, but what are you each going to do to ensure that Corangamite is at the forefront of securing economic and social benefits from the transition that is coming? We've heard you all speak passionately about projects that are happening, that we are well poised with the G21, with educational institutions, but and we'll start with you, Libby. I mean, you're the sitting member. What are you going to try and do to ensure that this region is at the front of the change that is coming?
The key is manufacturing, and as I've just said a few times already, that our Reconstruction Fund will give an opportunity for that type of investment in local manufacturing. If we want to see our region be a powerhouse in renewables, we actually need to invest in local manufacturing. We have a fantastic EV electric vehicle policy. We're going to reduce the tariffs for electric vehicles. But part of it is actually, how do we get on board with that? What do we do to actually make it a benefit for our region? We can build componentry here in our region. We did have an automotive industry, and I would love to see that kick back in. We have opportunities for waste and recycling. We have opportunities to take waste and be a leader in how we create new products. It's about providing incentives for industry to take up this opportunity. We have the most wind, in this region, across the country. We are a very windy place. We have an opportunity to put up those wind turbines and to actually build them here. We already see Keppel Prince doing that. They have struggled under the federal government because they have not had the work. We need to ensure they get that work. And that's where we, Labor and I, am committed to doing so. And I will actually work really hard as an advocate to make sure this region does become a powerhouse.
Can you maybe give us some examples, Libby? I mean, you mentioned Keppel Price there. It's very interesting. For those, I'm sure many of you probably do know, in Waurn, wind turbine manufacturer, laid off jobs some years ago because their componentry and the product they were selling wasn't being used in Australia. I mean, it was underneath an Abbott government, which he was, Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister, very much against wind farms, didn't like them, didn't like the look of them, wasn't shy about, expressing his opinion on that. But what have you been doing as a local member here to try and encourage, counterparts like Deakin over in Waurn to say, hey, where are we going with this? Can we really celebrate these people in our region doing things that are at the cusp of change?
Yeah.
What have you been doing?
Well, with Keppel Prince, they've come to me in Canberra, and I've advocated for them, given them an entree to the federal government to actually put their case. I'm constantly speaking in Parliament about the need for a stronger incentives and for manufacturing of a product that is going to give us better outcomes in terms of emissions. So I have actually been a strong advocate, but I think in the future there is so much more that we will be able to do in government. It's interesting that under the former state Liberal government, when Matthew Guy was planning minister and later Premier, I mean, he did really put wind turbines, wind farms, into the wilderness. He stopped wind farms basically through legislation, and it was really tragic to see. We need to ensure that they are part of the plan, and we also need to obviously extend solar.
Yeah, I'm going to keep things moving. Steph, we've heard your role in G21. You've got a pretty good understanding of where this sector's sort of looking. What does being at the front of the pack as this transition occurs look like for you?
I think embracing everything that's happening, Tim. I really do. I can't reiterate strongly enough how much energy there is, how much intelligence there is, how much innovation is actually going on at the moment. And as I said, the REACH Trailblazer project over at Deakin is fantastic. The fact that G21 is like-minded. I was talking about Geelong Port before the bell went before as well. And that's another area where it's an absolute hub of innovation and new technology. I think we really just need to manage to harness that. I think Libby's spot on with talking about the manufacturing is going to be absolutely critical to our future, and that advanced manufacturing that we do have the capacity for through Deakin. All of the precincts that we do already have, expanding all of those. I also think you got it quite right in your opening remarks, Tim. It's the national level, global level, and the very local level as well. When I'm talking to people, everybody's feeling energised, and they want to be empowered to dictate their own future, to do their own bit. And I think if we can actually enable people to do that, provide policy settings that do allow for that. I was talking to a Barwon Heads resident the other day, hello Mark if you're here, talking about local community energy trading using a specific currency. Now, I don't know what the answer is to that yet, and neither does he, but it was a really interesting, exciting idea that he's heard about, talking about somebody over in WA with a cryptocurrency called Power Ledger. Now, those sorts of things, I think we really need to help people to actually engage with their local communities more effectively. I've often thought we grow a lot of our own food at home, and we should all have gates in our fences so that we can have zucchinis from next door and hand over our cucumbers, and we do need to rotate. So to be able to have the transition streets idea, I suppose, work in practice on a bunch of different levels, and local communities, we've got the solar and battery prototype idea going with Queenscliff. The Climate Action Group there's got a fantastic proposal. If that can get up, we're actually powering a town that can be replicated as well. Lots of exciting ideas anyway.
Alex Marshall, do you think the community is feeling energised and empowered, as Steph said, about the change that's coming?
Yes, absolutely.
And why?
Because I've seen it and I'm part of it, and it's super exciting to see so many people who are so keen, like Transition Streets is fantastic, to adopt new projects and ideas and incentives, initiatives to address the climate emergency. And I love the question because it's correct in saying that there's a transition coming, and I think it's vital that we take immediate action not to miss the opportunity of this decarbonisation transition for all of the social and economic benefits that present to Corangamite and Australia in a post-carbon society.
Look, I'm going to keep things tracking along. I won't make this a question, but I just sort of think it's worthy of note. Only today there was a statement by over 31 mayors and councillors basically calling on the Australian government to have a much needed plan on climate change, but also to have disaster plans. So when things like floods and fires, which we've all been warned are coming and are now happening, happen, that we are prepared. It's clear that we're not prepared. You now have an entire township of Lismore where there was a massive housing crisis in the Northern Rivers, in that part of the world. They will now have no homes. We're now going to have internal migration going on in a way that we might not have seen in quite a long time. So I think it's really interesting to note that we are hearing these desperate calls from local governments, and you both appreciate this, having been mayors from the Surf Coast Shire Council, from the Geelong Council, that it must be frustrating with your council hats on to see so many of your colleagues at that level desperately crying out for leadership from a federal government. I'll leave that there as my comment, as the cliche goes. But anyway, let's keep moving on to a more local focus. How is climate change affecting the people of Corangamite? Alex, I'll start with you.
The climate crisis, as you say, is currently and continues to exacerbate natural disasters, including bushfires, which is a particular concern to Corangamite. We also have many farmers and a great agricultural industry within Corangamite who all know too well the impacts of droughts, water shortages and extreme weather. We have a beautiful coastline along here, and sea levels rising will not only impact on tourism but also people's homes and where they can live. Jobs rely on a clean environment. Over 1 million jobs in industries including tourism, fishing, farming are all at risk, and if we continue on this track we'll experience huge economic losses. Food, insurance and health costs will all go up. But if we act now, today, with serious, strong climate action, electricity bills will go down, more jobs will be created, and we will flourish in a post-carbon society.
So we've just had an Infrastructure Australia report that's basically looked at the strengths and weaknesses for this region, for the Waurn Southwest and for this part of the world, pointing out that we are absolutely blessed with an abundance of natural environment and abundant rainfall in certain parts, that makes things like dairy production so, so prominent. Where half 25% of Australia's dairy product comes out of that part of the world. But there was also a barb in the tail there where it was talking about the fact that climate change is already threatening primary productions and primary producer sectors like that because rainfall is reducing, because it's becoming more variable, because the climate is drying. So, and I'll give this one to you first, Steph. I mean, what does climate change look like for Corangamite now? How is it affecting us right now when the fires are so fresh in our memory? We are one of the most at-risk regions in the country. We are surrounded by the Otways, which are drying in many ways. We're seeing more variable rainfall. We're seeing eroding coastline. But what does what does climate change look like in Corangamite for you?
I think Alex actually nailed it really well. So in addition to what Alex has said, I think the extremity of weather events is probably the most visible at the moment. Certainly when you see the snapped off trees on Barnheads Road and the damage that was caused by some of the extreme storms we've had. I think the greatest fear is around the rising sea levels and the coastal erosion, because we are all passionate about our beaches and our coastal areas. And certainly at local government level, that work in mapping the impacts on low-lying areas has been done, certainly been done by City of Greater Geelong, I'm sure Surf Coast Shire, Borough of Queensland as well. But there's also that element of doom and anxiety and fear around climate change that I think certainly people in this room are experiencing. Certainly Parents for Climate Action Group talked to me about that and the impact on kids. So I think the mental health impacts are really important as well, and we need to acknowledge that that is part of it. But I think most importantly, the fact that the climate change conversation is being had is actually making people think about how to behave. So I will always try and bring it back to a positive, because I do feel a really positive vibe. Like Alex, I do feel that people feel they've been heard now and that things are happening. And I don't care how cynical someone may be, and there are some very cynical people out there, as we all know. Very, very few people, if anybody, can argue with the fact that we need to stop pooping in our own nest. So that's what I tend to fall to and say that covers everything in terms of consumption, waste management, emissions reduction, everything. We need to actually sort out how we're behaving, and that's from a global industrial level right down to going to the op shop rather than buying fast fashion, you know, those sorts of things. And for the climate change response plan that we developed at the City of Greater Geelong, so I've got a lot of paperwork here because it's an absolute ripper. The risks that we identified here were specifically sea level rise, more frequent and intense rainfall, pressures on emergency management services, more severe droughts, more hot days and therefore more pressure on vulnerable groups, disruptions to transport routes and infrastructure, and the economic impacts of all of those extreme things too. So thank you.
So, and I'm sure Libby's probably going to agree with some of these, and she'll obviously get a chance in just a moment, and we'll make this the last question to throw to the audience. I'm going to put my hand up. I'm a cynic. 1912. Story in the Maple Mercury, produced in coal-producing regions all around the country. 1912, warning of potential impacts of burning coal. We've been having this conversation about climate change for decades. It has been at the top of the policy tree in Australia. Its ebbs and flows since the 1990s. It has toppled leaders on both sides of government. Yes, there's doom and gloom. The east coast of Australia has just been flooded away. 2 years ago, it was on fire. I think doom and gloom is a reasonable stocktake of the situation when people have literally just been smacked about the head for decades of policy inaction, seeing governments toppled, and inaction on climate change. It is a fact that there has been inaction on climate change on both sides of government, and we've been having this discussion for a very long time. It's lovely to be having it again, and it's nice to see a bit of consensus here, but anyway, let's go back to the start of the question, which is, Libby, what does climate change in Corangamite look like at the moment for you?
Look, I just want to put it in the context that we are here to discuss a federal election and the impacts of policy on our local environment and across the nation. So whether it is floods and fires up in Queensland, or whether it's erosion of our beaches in our region here, or the impact on our farmers and agriculture and the impacts that a really volatile climate is having on food production, we actually have to face the fact that we need to do better. The coalition government, the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government, with people like Joyce and Morrison holding up a lump of coal in the chamber, that is where we are heading. If we continue in this direction, we need to have federal policy that is going to back in emission reduction to the point that we reduce our impacts, that we reduce the heating of the planet. So, you know, we are facing a higher anxiety in young people in particular. They are concerned about the future. And while there are some there are positive things that we can do, the main thing we need is a federal government that has a plan that shows leadership on climate and actually is prepared to put in a plan that is going to work. And we have not seen that. We do need some change.
Yeah. I think you all touched on it there. The central premise of that question was what does climate change look like in Corangamite? I think we sort of got there somewhere in the middle. We had a late entrant, which is Meg Watkins, apologies, who is a candidate from the Animal Justice Party. So we're just going to allow a brief moment, if I can grab a microphone from one of you, that's all right, Laura's onto it here. Just going to have a brief introduction. Meg, why don't you come up here and take centre stage, introduce yourself and take a few minutes.
Hello everyone. This is working? Yep.
Yes.
Hello everyone, my name is Meg Watkins and I'm the Animal Justice Party candidate for Corangamite, which resides on the beautiful Waurn country of the people of the Kulin Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded. If we haven't met, I am a Surf Coast local and a passionate animal and environmental advocate. I'm driven by a desire to end suffering for all beings, and I'm guided by the Animal Justice Party's 4 core values: kindness, equality, rationality and non-violence. Unfortunately, I was not able to be on the panel due to a late invitation to this event. However, I'm here because I am gravely concerned about the effects of climate change, which we as a species, all species on our planet, face. There is no bigger threat to life on our planet and no issue more prominent or terrifying for my generation. There has been a lot of important discussion tonight about fossil fuels, energy, coal, gas, mining. There's been a lot of discussion tonight about emissions reduction targets and net zero. But unfortunately, none of these measures are enough. The Animal Justice Party's policy is to reach net zero emissions by 2035 or sooner, 15 years sooner than Liberal and Labor's targets. However, we know that net zero should not be the end goal. Carbon neutral will not help us ultimately. We need to be carbon negative, that is, draw down carbon. Because just staying at the status quo is not good enough anymore. So what's my plan to address the climate emergency? What is the real and immediate action that we can take to begin the process of becoming carbon negative? The solution is actually quite simple. It's the cow in the room. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. You heard that right, the leading cause. What was once an Australia of lush biodiverse habitats has since been squeezed out, stripped to make way for agricultural land. This mass land clearing has driven the decimation of biodiversity, the contamination of our water sources, shamefully high emissions outputs, and ultimately climate change. 93% of land clearing is to clear pasture for animal agriculture, and yet it only produces 18% of the world's calories. But the impacts of animal agriculture go far past land clearing. There is one thing that scientists agree, one thing that they agree will have more impact on the climate in the next 20 years than all of our fossil fuel sources combined: methane, a potent greenhouse gas with a warming potential more than 28 times that of carbon dioxide and 104 times the environmental impact. Methane is driving climate change, and Australia's 27 million cattle and 70 million sheep are some of the largest emitters of methane. We cannot implement real climate solutions while the current demand for meat and dairy products prevails and individuals and governments do not take the science seriously. Farming animals for food is destroying our planet and our ability to thrive on it. Land clearing must be immediately banned, and agriculture industries must be supported into plant-based farming, which will allow huge areas of degraded land to once again rewild and be free from the impacts of human activity. The Animal Justice Party is the only political party with a science-based climate policy. No other political party has policies which demonstrate a clear understanding of the rapid impact of methane and land clearing on the global climate. If our political representatives invested as much money into clean energy solutions, sustainable plant-based food agricultural systems, and education as they accepted from the back pockets of the coal and gas mine industries, we could find our way out of this mess. The money is there, our leaders just need to decide that this is a priority. I was told by my partner during a heated discussion last week, your sense of justice is unrelenting. It wasn't meant as a compliment, but I take it as one. The people of Corangamite and indeed of Australia deserve unrelenting climate justice. Liberal, Labor and the Greens must stop covering their eyes and ears when they hear science that they don't like. I am clear that we must rapidly phase out fossil fuels. We must ban the creation of any new coal mines or gas wells. We must undertake massive rewilding. We must truly listen to First Nations knowledge, and we must support renewable energy initiatives. But if these actions are to have any real meaning, we must also address the blatant environmental devastation caused by intensive animal farming. Taking action now can secure our future. As a young person, I'm nearly done. As a young person, I'm just at the beginning of my life, and yet I'm here fighting for quality of life for my future grandchildren. The people in power have fundamentally failed us. Our leaders continue to walk away from climate change, hoping that we won't see through their placating gestures or flat-out denials. But I see through it, and I hope you do too. Because the choice is simple: continue along the path of convenience and profit over planet, or genuinely and immediately take all required steps to lift ourselves out of a climate emergency, which is the single biggest threat to our world as we know it. Thank you.
All right, questions from the floor. So just going to make sure we've got a roving mic ready to rock. We do, just over here. Thank you. So Mike Forrester, have we got Mike Forrester? There's Mike Forrester.
Thank you.
If you just wanted to introduce yourself, has you got the mic going there?
Hi, Mike Forrester. I'm a paediatrician at the local hospital and the chair of the Doctors for the Environment Australia. Thanks for inviting the question, and thank you for attending today to the candidates. So climate change, we feel, is the biggest public health issue of the 21st century, and that's been stated by the WHO. The top 5 causes of child death will increase internationally on our current course, and in Australia, future generations will be less healthy than today. Stopping new gas or coal mining now and other methane reduction tactics will be the only way to avert this trend. Specifically regarding health planning, would you develop a national climate change and health strategy for risk assessment and mitigation, health sector adaptation and disaster resilience planning to improve the health for this and future generations?
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. And I guess that goes, it's sort of timely in some ways. It goes to exactly what this group of councils were calling on today, from, basically saying, and we'll start with you, Libby. I mean, would Labor develop a national climate change and health strategy that looks at risk assessment, mitigation, health sector adaptation, disaster resilience to improve health for this and future generations? What does that look like in a Labor policy term?
Well, I think Labor is very open to looking at the impacts of climate change and looking at mitigation, but also importantly looking at the impacts on health. We all know that with the heat waves that come with climate change, that many people in the old community do struggle. We need to make sure that people are kept safe and that people can access help when they need it. Medicare has been a great public policy of Labor. So yes, I would certainly advocate for a policy that enables us to look after people with the impacts of climate change. I think it's certainly a value. I would like to actually discuss in more detail with you the components that you're actually, you're wanting to see, because there's a lot in your question, but it certainly has merit. And speaking to a lot of the GPs in our region, they are worried about the impacts of climate change on our community, and they are concerned about the ability of a young person perhaps to see a GP when needed, the number of psychologists, the need for mental health investment in things like headspaces are really important to our region, because COVID's hit us hard. Climate change is impacting on the mental well-being of people. So I do, certainly I'm looking at that myself now, and I'd be interested to talk further with you about the detail. Yeah.
Thanks, Libby. Steph, central to that question is right, there is a lot in there, but there is a lot in this subject, and especially for someone who deals with children's health, I think you would be pretty touched by it. At the core of the question is basically mitigation, adaptation and resilience, and developing a policy response in the health area to that. What does that look like, Steph? I mean, is there something you would support?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a really good suggestion. My background's in sustainability reporting, so that's about developing a strategy and then publicly reporting your performance against that. Interestingly, the strategic plan for the City of Greater Geelong, which is 265,000 population, and I think quite a representative community, so like a microcosm of Australia really. They, in the last one that we did, which was a 4-year plan, they mandated that we have to do a public health and wellbeing strategy as well, and we put that into our strategic plan. So we actually rolled the health and the climate change response into our strategic plan for the first time, so that actually worked really well. So I do have actually a history of doing exactly that. Reporting against it is something they're doing at the moment, which will be really interesting to see how the city does perform against the targets that we set. Interestingly, in sustainability reporting, there's 3 sectors that don't have a specific, what they call sector supplement, so extra guidance around that, and that is health, education and local government. And I was really quite surprised by that, because they're the 3 areas that really, really should be accountable for their performance in sustainability. And I'm talking environmental, social and economic sustainability, because they all need to be tied together, because they are tied together. So I would absolutely love the opportunity to do that, and I think I do that exceptionally well. So thanks for the question. It was really good.
I think it's interesting when we're talking about the health space, and certainly, it's interesting we touched on it there as well when we talk about heat waves and some of the most vulnerable, which is the elderly, are the ones who often get hit by this and least well equipped to deal with it. We've seen it for the last 2 years with COVID-19, and whether we are ready to whether our health system is equipped to deal with some of these issues. I would suggest clearly not. There's been a lot of failures. We've literally seen some of our elderly locked in their homes, locked in their rooms. Alex, in environmental sort of, with your environment hat on, what does mitigation, adaptation and disaster resilience look like in a health term for the Greens? I mean, is this something that you would like to see elevated into the health space in our thinking for the future going forward? What does it look like from Greens' perspective?
Yes, well, to address the issues with health, which is an impact from the climate emergency, we have to have adequate funding into climate-specific responses, as well as into public services in general, so fully funded Medicare, to include mental health and dental, fully funding the NDIS, and addressing the issues within the aged care sector as well, and ensure there's a lot in that question. I'm trying to focus my thoughts, but we need legislation to increase funding to emergency services as well, and for fossil fuel companies to be held accountable and clean up what they have damaged.
Yeah, I think it's all right. I mean, broadly, you were saying, the Greens' position is that you would like to see fully funded Medicare. You would like to see more money going towards that for, mental health services such as the NDIS and, things like that. So you definitely ticked off some things there. We'll keep things tracking. We are looking for the roving mic to go to Odie Evans. Have we got Odie Evans in the audience here? Hi, Odie. Odie, if you just want to introduce yourself and far away.
Hello, I'm Odie. I'm a Year 12 student at Bellarine Secondary College. I'm also the college captain. And my question relates to youth specifically. So there's a link between the youth mental health crisis and the climate crisis. And this is arguably perpetuated by lack of political action. So my question is, what reassurances can you give that you will deliver on your goals and policies to reduce the eco and climate anxiety felt by the young people of today?
start with you. What reassurances can you give that you will deliver on the goals and policies developed to aid in reducing levels of eco and climate anxiety? We heard from you earlier, saying about the doom and gloom. I mean, it's pretty clear that some young people, they're really worried. They are. So what reassurances can you give?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. It's a really important question. We were at the opening of the new Headspace facility in Ocean Grove only a couple of weeks ago, and it was the young people that launched that, and it was so high impact seeing those people engaging, stepping up to the plate, and obviously they've had some challenges in their recent experience as well. So I think, as with most of the opportunities that we've got and the situation we're facing, communication and education is really important. And I would like to see youth-led communication. I think quite often the communication that's put out by government bodies at every level, state, federal and local, is frankly pretty lame. I don't think they really connect with the younger people, and I don't think they necessarily hit the mark. So I also think that the younger people of our community have a much better idea in terms of practical solutions than a lot of the dinosaurs, and I include myself in some of that as well. And I think that idea of moving forward with your ideas, communicating it effectively, certainly in the ways that technology is used at the moment. And I'm not going to go anywhere near politicians being on TikTok, because that's just the height. It should be a crime.
The PM's just jumped on TikTok.
Yeah, they all have. I don't think there's many that escape that. I think communication and education working together with input from people of your age, Odie, would be a fantastic start. Anyway, thanks for the question.
And thank you, Odie, for the question. Just a little comment from myself. I think it's interesting. We've seen climate strikes, with student climate strikes around the country, disparaging marks coming from certain sections of society, including the coalition side of politics. There's certainly been some disparaging remarks about whether children should be in school or whether they should be hitting the streets. It's interesting because we are seeing more children hitting the streets. This very event is brought together by the Parents for Climate Change. So there is a frustration there, and I think the frustration with children seems to be that it's forcing them to get out of the streets. So Alex Marshall, what does that look like from a Greens perspective? And I'm really acutely aware that here we are in Corangamite. We may not be sitting at a cabinet level if anyone gets into government or anything like that, but we are all connected to our community here. What reassurances are you trying to give a younger next generation who are clearly uneasy about what's happening in the world that they're going to inherit?
First of all, I want to thank you for your question. It was really well worded and it was great. Thank you. I think one of the reassurances I can give is that we're doing it, we're fighting, we are gradually being heard, and as someone who is a young person who has also experienced mental health and climate anxiety, due to the climate, there was a quote recently I saw, was "Don't get mad, get elected."
Yeah, that's great.
And I think you can do both. I think we can be angry, I think we can be anxious, I think we can be frustrated and sad and upset and terrified and scared, but we can also take action, and we can also stand up, go to the climate strike tomorrow, we can have our voices heard. And so essentially my reassurance is I'm right there with you, we can do it.
Libby Coker, the kids are alright, but they're uneasy and they're pissed off.
Yep.
What reassurance can you give them that things are going to be alright, or that you're going to try and make them?
Firstly, hi Odie, and thank you very much. I would say step up, continue to fight, raise your voice, because with that comes power, a sense of power. You can. It's important that you continue to do that, and I know you do that. And there are many young people I've walked with in climate strikes, and I think there's a real sense of power when you walk together and make a statement. If all young people stood together and made their voices heard, we would get action, and we're not getting it from this Morrison government currently. The next thing I'd say is come join my climate action reference group. I have a great group of people. I'd love more young people on board. I have worked with young people to actually give them a voice through my office and out into the community, because you have a lot to say. And to be quite honest, it is the young people's voices that actually inspires people to think differently about what we need to do. I would also think that the third thing, the key to this, is that we need a federal government that's going to give you comfort that we are actually taking the action required so that your future looks bright and prosperous.
I might just quickly go back. Odie, how did you feel those responses to the, you got to listen to them all, say, you've had a moment to process them. I'm sorry, I'm going to put you back on the spot.
A dangerous question. Alex, I really resonated with you said. This is so political. I don't want to enforce my political opinions on anyone. But thank you very much for all of your answers. Yes, Alex, I very much resonated with what you said. And you too, Libby and Stephanie. Can I ask a tiny little extra question? I think the voice of First Nations young people is equally as important. I'm just wondering whether you would emphasize that with your initiatives to involve more young people, and if that's something you would consider. Sorry to ask another question.
That's just fine, and we'll make it I want literally 15 seconds from each. We'll start with you, Libby, First Nation.
Yeah, Labor has a very strong view on voice and treaty and constitution. We need that for our First Nations people, young people, our First Nations people, the Waurn here in the region. Very important we do include their voice.
So, Stephanie.
No, short answer, yes, Odie. I think that's just a natural part of any consultation now, so absolutely.
Alex?
Absolutely. Climate justice is First Nations justice. Climate justice needs to be intersectional. Climate action needs to be intersectional and inclusive to be achievable and successful.
Let's get moving. Have we got a mic? Yes, we do, for Chris Fox. Have we got Chris Fox here at all? We've got a hand going up in the back here. Thank you. Laura's coming to you with the mic right now. Chris, I'll just get you to introduce yourself quickly and then get to your question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Fox and I'm with the ACF and I'm representing the Geelong Renewables Not Gas campaign here. So over 3,000 Geelong and Bellarine residents have signed a petition calling for the rejection of the Viva gas import terminal for safety, climate and environmental concerns and loss of amenity reasons. It wouldn't be required if Victorians reduced the use of gas in their homes. The state is developing a gas substitution roadmap, which, if ambitious and well funded, will help drive down Victorians' use of gas. Support from the federal government for gas demand reduction is critical. If elected, what measures would your party support to reduce Victorian householders' use of gas, to simultaneously address climate change, energy affordability, and protect human environmental health?
Thank you, Chris. Let's start with you. If elected, what measures would your party do to basically help us wean us off the gas?
Yes. So, Victorians use gas pretty much more so than nearly any other state in Australia. So there are challenges because we use it for our hot water systems, we use it for cooking for it in our hot plates, and it is a very good question because if we're going to transition, we need to encourage people to move away. I'd really like to see incentives. It's great to see the state governments taking action, and I think we need incentives from a federal level to make sure that not just in Victoria but across our nation, that we actually look at how we move to electricity-driven appliances, which can then be driven by renewable. So, first step is to, as you said, wean people off the appliances we currently use. How do we actually get people to use other appliances that are electric? And we need to look at the methodology of doing that and the incentives that come with it. We also need to ensure that once we have got people using electrical appliances, we need to have a capacity to put it back into the grid. So that's where Labor's rewiring the grid, the national grid, so that we can actually take it in renewables is really important. At the moment, some people are actually paying to have their solar put back into the grid, and that's just unacceptable, it's wrong. We also have a policy around community batteries, so you can actually take that, take power from a battery, even if you don't have solar. We do need to continue to subsidise solar, and we really need to look at batteries on a level that people can afford. So there is good work to be done. I'm up for the challenge, Labor's up for the challenge. But the first thing is to get people to actually move across from gas appliances domestically, but also within industry as well. So we need to transition away from gas in industry as well, and towards using powered by electricity that's powered by renewables.
Steph Asher, gas-fired recovery. It feels like the Liberal Party is pushing in a different direction to Chris's question here. You know, the government set up a COVID Commission task force to respond out of COVID, and basically their first answer was hit the gas. What are we going to do about our reliance on gas?
It is a very good question, sorry.
Sorry, you go on.
Charging. Thank you, Chris, for the question. And look, there's a few things that I want to comment on this one, because we do all appreciate we can't get to net zero overnight. We do understand that gas is an important transition fuel, whether we like it or not. What's happened in Ukraine is a reminder of how important energy security is, and we need to do that transition to net zero right. As Mayor, obviously we have councillors on both ends of the spectrum and everything in between, and as representatives of a very diverse community in Geelong, we had to come up with some sort of position, we talked about it as a position, on gas and in new developments in particular, and also on the floating gas terminal in Corio Bay. So I asked the Nous group, because I was fairly agnostic on the situation because I didn't have enough information with which to work. So I asked the Nous group to facilitate an information session, and they brought in Richard Bolt, who'd been head of the DepSec of, I think it's the DPJR, or whatever it's called, that department, head of energy basically for the last decade. So he gave us a 90-minute session, which was incredibly interesting, and unfortunately the takeout was gas is the least worst option. Now it is necessary as part of the transition. Yes, I understand the issue with methane, and I do understand that all fossil fuels are not ideal, but we do need to have gas as part of that transition, and that's the Liberal Party's position. And I tend to make decisions around the evidence that I'm given, and it was a very reliable source. It was a completely non-political presentation. So my position now is, as a transition fuel, I do support the use of gas.
Yeah. I'm just pausing to sort of think. I mean, it is problematic. Least worst option is a difficult term when it comes to some of these issues, and I guess. Look, I'm just going to keep moving on. Alex, we're talking about how to wean ourselves off gas. The coalition is absolutely committed to a gas-fired recovery. We hear these terms like least worst option. We know that we are opening up massive new oil and gas fields in the Otway Basin. These things don't just happen overnight. They are being locked in and will lock us into gas for a very long time. We hear about the Viva LNG terminal. Do you see us weaning ourselves off gas in Victoria anytime soon?
If you vote for the Greens, I think we could. We really want to no new fossil fuel projects and to not have any more gas. And I appreciate you, Chris, by the way. Chris is an awesome activist doing lots of local climate action. Energy security is super important, and I think that's why we need to, instead of picking the better of two evils, we need to invest into renewable energy, renewable infrastructure and storage. And we can do this by taxing large corporations, taxing the billionaires, and removing the subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. And that's how we can move away from gas in Victoria.
I'm just going to consult, how are we looking here time-wise? Because we basically are coming to the end of the session here. So I think we will probably wrap it up there soon. Just on the gas question, I think it's really interesting, just a couple of key facts and figures. Australia is the third largest exporter of gas in the world, or fossil fuels in the world, so let's, we put it there, gas is right up there. That puts us behind the Saudis and the Russians. There is these interesting talking points that are coming from the coalition at the moment, which is about Ukraine not wanting to, we don't want to end up like Europe, which is facing an energy supply crisis. We have no energy supply crisis here in Australia, really. We've got an abundant amount of oil and gas. We've got an abundant amount of coal too. It's just whether we decide to keep exporting it or whether we keep it for domestic purposes or whether we quarantine it or anything along those lines. So just to sort of cut through some of the spin there, there's no gas shortage in Australia. We've got plenty of it here. It's whether we decide to quarantine it, which is all well within the realms of the government of the day, either side, either stripe. So we can sort of just cut through there. I just want to leave it on something interesting, and it's just, and I think this is something that should be above politics. We heard it touched on earlier about, these ex-military leaders who are basically coming together and ringing the bell at the moment. And this has been going on in the US for a long time. The US Army has been coming up with reports that are realising that climate change is basically one of the biggest issues for the US Army at the moment, because it means mass migration, it means destabilisation of trade routes. We are seeing that in the South China Sea, we're seeing it all over the place. This is a non-partisan topic when it's, in the rooms of, in the barracks of the US Army, and it's been going on through generations of governments over there, regardless of what we hear in politics. And it's going on here as well. We're hearing, former Defence Force chiefs such as Chris Barry, former heads of the RAF, and they're all coming together. So I'll just sort of leave you with some of their comments. This is the most recent comments. They've been increasingly elevating their voice at the moment. So this was the open letter to Australia's political leaders out this week. We consider that climate change now represents the greatest threat to the future and security of Australians. The first duty of government is the safety and protection of the people, but Australia has failed when it comes to climate change threats. Australia currently has no credible climate policy, leaving our nation unprepared for increasingly harsh impacts. We call upon all those offering themselves as political leaders in this election year to make climate change a primary focus and commit to mobilising the resources necessary to address this clear and present danger. Our Earth is already too hot and climate change is already dangerous. Fossil fuel emissions must be reduced to zero at emergency speed. The goal of net zero emissions by 2050 is wholly inadequate. Decarbonisation must be reached as close to 2030 as possible. Accelerating renewables to secure energy resilience in a conflicted world is critical for Australia. That is signed on behalf of dozens of very senior, the top of the Army in Australia and the Defence Force, from Admiral Chris Barry on down. So I'll leave that with you, given that you will hear a lot about security in this election. You'll hear about government saying who do you trust to secure your future, who do you trust to look after your security. You've heard from all your candidates tonight, who I would like you all to give a warm round of applause for. It takes a lot of guts to put yourself forward in politics. It's a brutal game, but I think it's been played quite nicely today. It's also nice to see all female candidates. wish you all the best when this infernal election is finally called. And I would like to thank everyone for organising. Laura, I'll let you take the floor and wrap it up.
Thanks, Tim. And again, thank you so much, candidates. Wouldn't have happened if you hadn't attended. We really appreciate it. Tim, you've done an amazing job at steering the ship tonight. I'll be keeping you on speed dial for some more mentoring advice, so I'm not gone yet, so just watch out. I want to quickly highlight that you can find a copy of the climate survey response that all of these candidates have answered on our Alliance website. Plus you can connect with us on Facebook if you wish to. I want to thank you all for your presence and your participation tonight. It absolutely speaks volumes about just how important it is to get active on climate. We'd like to end tonight with an inspiring vision for the future we all dream about and we all want to see. Here is a short preview of a new film that's just out, Regenerating Australia, and it shows what is possible when we all work together, community and all levels of government, to address this climate crisis. We stand so much to gain. So much to gain. That's what's confusing. So much to gain and so much to lose if we do not act now and with great intensity. Regenerating Australia is a better life for everyone and everything. You, all of you, and you, have the power to shape the future, and I hope you do. Thanks for coming.
We leave you with a look back at the highlights of a remarkable decade that has changed Australia forever.
The 2020s began in extraordinary fashion.
Work more regionally.
More work, more opportunity.
Solar and batteries would be ideal.
A bit of sustain was just like.
Today marked the first time that Australia has run on 90% renewable energy for an entire month.
That makes me feel really, really happy.
The government today announced it will follow the lead of other countries and live stream key policy discussions.
I think it's good. We need transparency.
Australians are now seeking out Australian-made and owned products. The ripple effect is that we are now seeing healthy farmers.
There's nothing like engaging animals in a landscape that's coming back to life to give all Australians a real heartbeat.
We can deal better with the world when we're connected to nature.
It's been amazing to see the change that's happened from the closure of the power stations to the renewable energy zones. The young people are starting to stay and find work.
This family right now are earning cash because their electricity service provider are paying them to use the battery in this unit as storage for the grid.
In a decade full of transition and tragedy, many Australians are finding renewed purpose in the regeneration of our social and ecosystems. Australians are starting to feel more secure.
This is a landmark day for our country.
A day like this means that all of this work has actually meant something.
Respect is back, and pride is back. Respecting the environment. From that gives us the strength to look for a brighter future.
If not me, who? If not now, when will we do it? That it's never too late to stand up and take action together.